Hey, welcome everybody to VictoriaMetrics Tech Talks 2.2, I think it is, Matthias. It's our second season, episode 2. We're having trouble streaming to your destination. Is it possible the stream was ended or deleted?
What? Do we need to check YouTube really quick?
Yep. Somebody might have canceled the stream.
Oh, lovely.
I think we just press on, even if this isn't being promoted or anything, because I think there's going to be great content in here. I think,
yeah,
press on.
Okay, perfect. Are we live right now?
Well, yeah, we're live. This babble is all in there. So again, you guys, anybody who's watched the VictoriaMetrics Tech Talk before knows this is par for the course. There's always going to be some audio issues or video issues. We're just showing that we're humans and screw everything up too. Just kidding. So today we've got a guest that I don't know if anybody. I know we haven't had Artem you on our channel yet. Do you want to give a quick intro to who you are and where you're from and just some interesting tidbits?
Sure. So my name is Artem. I am from Belarus, currently live in Poland, Krakow, and so joined VictoriaMetrics about a year and a half ago, and my primary responsibility is storage, and probably the only. The recent change that I introduced was partition index. It took a year to implement, and that's why we have this tech talk today.
Awesome. Yeah. And I know that with my background in logging from Elastic and Splunk and others, that being able to partition these indexes and manage them is really something that not everybody needs, but everybody that will grow will need it. And it becomes so important. So from what I've heard about this, there's a chance to really have some great performance increases and just controlling overall storage volumes too. So it's going to be cool to dive into this. Matthias,
yeah.
What's new with you, my friend?
Not a whole lot. Mostly just using VictoriaMetrics to yell at me when I need to take care of my animals has probably been the biggest thing that I can talk about on stream. There's been some fun stuff that's in development, but it would spoil future tech talks. So right now it's mostly just been improving, like our public playground has been a big focus point, but sadly, most of that's just been in a private environment right now, but it should be live in a week or so.
So you're going to rebrand this to Pet Talks then? Is that what it sounds like you're doing?
I mean, perhaps.
Okay, good, cool.
Or my pet project.
Yeah, awesome. And as you guys, anybody who's listening to and has watched any before, I'm still on the most insane home lab journey of getting things good and then breaking them to try to make them better and realizing what I'm learning. So I should have been documenting this closer because I think it would be a good tale of woe to share, but instead I'll just share that at a bar one day. So yeah, cool. So cool. Yeah, I guess we can kick off now. Is Artem super excited to learn a little bit about, this indexing and why the changes were made. I think maybe if you guys could start off with that is sort of just the why we dedicated a year and a half to implementing this. Like what's the end result? Why would somebody care that this exists?
Yeah. Artem, do you mind if I try to explain it and you can just interrupt me if I get any details wrong?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the legacy index, which is how everything was managed in VictoriaMetrics prior to 1.134, the way it worked was there was a couple of different indexes, and there was a global index, which had 2 generations, and a per day index by default. And then the global index did not depend on date. So there was just one giant global index for everything. When a new time series ID, which would be like the unique set of key value pairs for labels and the metric name were added to the database, it would append to that index. And then there was a prefix on that index for day or per day. So if you had the same time series, but when the day flipped over, that would lead to a new entry inside of the index. Everything correct with that so far?
That's an in-depth explanation right away. So, okay.
Mark, you had a question?
Yeah, I guess just so because of creating those duplicate indexes or pieces in the indices, in my mind, I'm thinking of now I'm doubling footprint on disk. and that's just going to keep going? Is it like an exponential thing if this wasn't changed, that eventually I just run out of space?
Go ahead, Artem.
Yeah, so legacy index was kind of fine, but yeah, it had its problem with the disk space. It might be surprising, but a lot of users actually complain about this, the size of the index. And well, while the size can be explained by, I don't know, let's say long metric names and well, high cardinality, the usage of the disk space was not optimal just because, well, the index was not deleted as the data was deleted, and so the partition index was introduced to solve this one primary problem: the efficient cleanup of the disk space as the data becomes outside the retention period. So before that, with the legacy index, it did happen, but it happened only once per
Retention period, right?
retention period, right? So right now it happens like every month. Well, just because, well, every time a partition is deleted, so the index is deleted as well, meaning that every month, basically.
Yeah. And the samples and the global index were stored on separate parts. So if we pulled up like my single node right now, there would be a folder for the global index, and then every month would have a separate folder. And in that folder, there's small parts, big parts, and the per day index, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And this doesn't go away until it turns into the previous index. And then after that previous index gets outdated, it goes away, right?
Right. I just wanted to add that it's not just per day index, but also a global index. So it's actually, so both global and per day indexes is a part of the index. So it's not like we don't have global index anymore.
And the reason for storing two indexes is so different query links can be processed efficiently, right?
Right. So so with the legacy index, whenever your time range of a query is longer than 40 days, so VictoriaMetrics switches to global index instead of per day index, just because, well, it's more efficient to search just global index once, then spawn more than 40 Go routines that search the caches and disk concurrently.
So it sounds like it's size on disk is a nice savings, but the real win is performance. It sounds like, right? If I've got these types of queries running, or
no, actually, it's the real win is this efficient disk usage.
Okay.
We don't get well. Our benchmarks don't indicate any performance gains like at all. It's just the same performance, really. That's in terms of CPU and memory.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more question on that. With the new indexing, is there anything that, and maybe I'm getting ahead, but that a user that wants to be using this has to be cognizant of in order to take advantage of it? Like, do I have to adjust how I'm thinking about my queries and timeframes, or is it just
No.
You just upgrade.
wonderful?
Yeah.
And we'll get into how the upgrade process works in a little bit.
Okay. Sorry, I'm a kid on the candy store. I'll listen for a bit.
We're making you eat your vegetables and sit through history class before we talk about the fun stuff. So yeah, the legacy index was still better than other time series databases on the market, but it did use a lot of storage, and it is really noticeable, especially in a lot of our enterprise customer settings, because there's a feature in enterprise called downsampling. And because of how the index tracks where things are, and you can't downsample that, right? Even if you only have one sample of something, you still have to track where that one sample is, and you can't really shrink that any farther.
Yeah.
So downsampling would make the actual sample data smaller, but it wouldn't be able to shrink down the index size. So
no, it's not the case.
And so it's really pronounced in a lot of our customer deployments because they're retaining metrics for years, that they're just tracking where the samples are is like 80% of their actual usage. And so that was one of the big motivations for having the per day index.
So that reminds me of like I guess it's, I don't know if it's just different in vernacular, but in Elastic, we would have rollups, like metric rollups. Is this the same idea as that I'm looking at a lower fidelity over a period of time? So I'm keeping the same sort of data, like a histogram almost, or is this a different concept?
So the way downsampling works is it doesn't perform any like averaging or any compute. What will happen is it'll break the database into certain windows. So usually like you have somewhere between a 15-second and minute ingestion interval or scrape interval. And then what downsampling is it'll break the data up into, let's just say, a 5-minute window. It's user tunable and you can do multiple layers of this. Where you say, I have a 15-second scrape interval, but after a month, I only want a 5-minute resolution. It'll take a 5-minute window, say, here's the most recent sample or the highest value sample. And then it will only keep that sample and discard the rest. And the reason for that, if you do, there's an interesting talk at PromCon where they talked about doing a more sophisticated algorithm to keep a more accurate shape. But doing that would be much more computationally intensive, whereas like I don't usually hear complaints from customers about downsampling taking all their compute resources. Yeah. They just flip it on and it happens.
And honestly, even if something takes resources, but it provides the result somebody's looking for, that's what they expect. As long as you deliver on what they're expecting, resources aren't usually a problem.
Even with the legacy index, I'm curious to see what it's like with the new index. But even with legacy index, downsampling's around a 50% reduction in storage for like cloud workloads or infrastructure workloads. And IoT, it's even crazier because there's no churn rate. So there's not as many index entries. So you're downsampling a bigger percentage of the data.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, unfortunately for Kubernetes setups, so downsampling actually won't solve your problem just because, well, index actually occupies, well, at least 50% of the data, of the entire disk space, often more.
Cube state metrics, yeah. So there are workloads like cube state metrics, which pretty much just track which containers live where. And so every time a container would restart, it would generate new time series. Yeah. Because the pod would get a different IP or a different pod name or something like that.
Because somebody designed that index when you could get a 46 gig hard drive and no one would ever fill that up, right? So we keep that same indexing and now we're indexing billions of time series a day. Yeah. Wow.
Huh. Yeah. So downsampling can help, but changing the index for high churn workloads is something that's going to be very impactful. Yeah. So I think the only thing we really missed here is how index rotation work. We didn't cover a ton. So if you notice in this diagram, there's the global index, and that's made up of 2 chunks, the current index, which is where new entries live. And then after one retention period, you take the current index and turn it into the previous index, and then the existing previous index gets deleted.
That's so that's for backup rollback purposes, right? Is that, or is the previous index used at any point during while they're 2 in existence?
It is still used. I mean, so imagine you have a retention of 12 months. You started your deployment like in January. Then on the next January, so the previous so the current index becomes previous, and the current index is basically empty. So where are you supposed to search, right? So in the previous. So that's why we keep previous for another retention period, just because, well, we have data for it, the corresponding data. And so, we have to wait for entire year to delete it. So that's the inefficiency of the legacy index.
Awesome. So it sounds like it was done that way because it had to be done that way at the time, and now we have But wait, there's more.
Yeah.
A new way to do it, right? Like this is the exciting part, I think, is this win.
Yeah. And so if we just wanted to go through how like a 1-day query and like a 40-day query would go with the legacy index, we can get to the exciting part. So right now, if you do a 1-day query and have per day indexing on, which is the default, what will happen is select or the query on single will go to the storage layer and ask the per day index what partitions contain the samples that match this query. And then it will search the small partitions, which is recently written data or data that can't be merged into a more optimal space. And it'll also search the big parts, which have been merged and organized. The way I think about this process is like when I move houses, I just initially just throw all my crap in the new house, and it's not very organized, and finding things takes forever and it's taking up more space than it should. But then once I'm get settled into the house, I do a background merge and organize things so they're packed more efficiently and easier to go through. So is that a accurate way to describe merging?
In a way, well, basically when the data first written to disk, so it's written in a in a part, right? And this part is small. So over time, so you accumulate a lot of small parts, and then so the logic of the background merge identifies parts to merge in a bigger part, right? And so then you have some bigger part and a few small parts. Over time, again, so those small parts accumulate, and so background merge creates another, let's say, well, average size part, right? So, and then over time, we have enough average size parts to merge in a quite big part. And so this is when a new big part is created. So why do we have two separate directories for big and small parts? So I'm not sure exactly, but I remember talking to Alex, and he explained that that was at the time the idea was that you actually mount two different file systems like on these directories, like big parts and small parts. So it just gave the possibility of mounting two different file systems for storing them. A bigger file system for big parts, a smaller file system for small parts, or maybe even different file systems for both.
I believe the reason for using different file systems was more for speed than size. So for the small parts where it's a bunch of tiny files and the global index where you want to do searches really fast, you would mount that on storage that was more expensive but much faster, like NVMe.
Yeah.
Or like GP3 and AWS. And then the big parts, since they're large sequentially written files, you could throw that on cheap storage, cheap, slow storage.
Yeah. Right. So not sure how many users actually do this thing. At least they have an option.
Not very many. It's something I've wanted to play with. Like I want to play with the tiering, and then I want to play with different file systems. Because right now we use right now our docs recommend ext4, but I'm curious if there's been some like interesting papers with having lower tail latency with XFS, or I want to play with like snapshotting file systems like ZFS and ButterFS and see if leveraging those advanced file system features has any like side effect inside the database.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to have some benchmarks and some testing like that. Even if some of our customers or users that are doing this could share some of that data. I would imagine that a lot of people would be interested to do this, but if you guys are questioning file systems and which ones to use, I can only imagine that somebody who wants to try this has no idea. So they're going to wait until there's at least a little bit of a path that they can follow. So I think getting some benchmarks and some data on what are best practices, if we even need them, would be super helpful.
Yeah. And usually because people are migrating away from a different time series database that's less efficient, I think they're just happy to be like, oh, cool, I'm already saving disk space or computer, whatever resource was their pain point before.
So they
And
they
so
think
they
they've
get,
hit peak efficiency, but they've hit just because they don't know there's more, right?
yeah. And so back to the query layer, the per day index will track which partitions, both small and big for that day, will have the results. And then it'll look inside those partitions for those samples and then pass them up to the query or VM select, correct?
Yeah, I just want to correct you that it doesn't look in different partitions, but parts, because, well, that's might be important. So whenever it receives a query, so it looks, well, actually partitions, but within the partitions, when you talk about big and small, those are parts. So it searches for the blocks within the parts, and yeah. Otherwise,
Okay.
other than that, is good.
Great. And then if we have a longer range query, it will just skip those per day indexes entirely, correct?
Yeah,
And so the index lookup.
it will use global index, but the global index is actually a part of IndexedDB, so it lives right next to per day index. So in your diagram, the global index on the right that we see, it's actually a legacy index. So the correct way to display that, well, to show that would be, so the box that says per day indexes. So you can just add the global index right in the next to it.
Yep. So this is how it would work if you are using anything older than 134. Correct.
133 actually. So
133
is when we introduced partition index. Yeah.
Okay. So if we were running the same query inside of, I'm just realized I'm missing a couple of arrows here. What would happen if we ran the same 40-day query inside of the per time index or the partition index? Is instead of it hitting the global index, it would hit the per month index for each month, correct?
Yeah. Interesting thing here happens when these 40 days actually include the entire months. So let's say your query starts at the end of the January and spans entire February, and also takes a little bit of March, right? So 3 months. So for these 3 months, well, VM storage will actually start three Go routines that query those three partitions concurrently, right? And so for January, it will indeed hit the per day index for that partition. For March as well, just because, well, those are just a parts of the months, not the entire months. But for the February, it will use the global index just because, well, it's going to be the entire months. Yeah, it switches when it sees that the time range actually coincides with the size of the partition. It will perform the search in global index, not the per day index.
Okay. And so to go back onto how the per month index works is now, instead of the index DB being it's in a separate place, it lives inside of the month of data that it's associated with, right?
Right.
Okay. And then the query range, if the whole month is contained, it'll search just the global index. And if it's only part of the month, it'll search the per day index.
Right.
Okay.
This is how it works right now. This is a bit too precise, just because, well, in order to search the global index, your time range should match exactly the time range of a partition. But we may consider make it a percent. Let's say if the time range actually covers the, let's say, 80% of the partition, we switch to global index. But I mean, no one asks for that, and we didn't see any problems with performance. But if we do, so we can at least try this option. But right now, it's just that simple.
And the biggest thing was making sure that storage was stable and that it was an easy migration, not taking advantage of the new world you live in, right?
Yeah, I mean, this change was huge, and a lot of things could be done, but wasn't done just because, I needed to stop somewhere and just, release it. So some things just weren't done because.
Yeah.
But
And
do you think
those are
when you're looking at those, you picked all the best meaty parts and kept them in, and just had to cut away some meat that, are you saying, might be added in? Like some additional?
Yeah, it's not about meat. It was actually some bugs. So I knew that changing some part would result in a bug, but I did not fix it just because, I just opted for a simple solution that was, obviously a bug, and we released with that bug, but we closed that bug later in a later version. An example is how we um, serve TSDB status queries. So that was definitely a bug, but we received the bug report and just fixed it.
See, honestly, to me, that just really also highlights the value of having the core contributors working at the organization too, right? Is that you know, if I make this change, what the ripple effects can be. Where if you were maybe a contributor that is doing this part-time, you could do great stuff, but you might not be as plugged in to know what all those ripple effects are. So, to me, it sort of states our commitment to make sure that things are stable and working their best. And
Right.
I just get excited about our
and
development.
most of the bugs and to-do features were performance improvements and little UX things like that. And the data format is stable and reliable, and all the user has to do is change the version. And VictoriaMetrics is smart enough to know that data in the old format and the new format exist, and is able to query both simultaneously. And the only issues are things like using the TSDB API, correct?
Yeah. So interestingly, the partition index release wasn't actually buggy. So the TSDB API bug was caused by it, but it wasn't a significant thing. So two significant bugs were related to performance and weren't actually introduced with partition index, but were introduced before. So I had to make a few preparations before the release of the partition index. And those preparations actually introduced the performance bugs. So as of now, we've fixed those, so it should be fine. So the current version 1.36 is pretty much stable. So yeah,
It's stable enough. We just tagged it as an LTS.
That's stable.
Yeah.
Yep. So we're stuck with it for at least another year.
Artem, you just had a moment of panic there. You just looked up and went, "What have I done?"
No. I mean, it took a year, and while it was interesting to work on it, but I mean, that's a lot. And so whenever anyone asks me if I'm going to write a documentation, so my answer is no, just because, I really had enough. And the having a tech talk is different. I mean, it's just, have fun, like having a good conversation, right?
That's right. And you know what I think too is I think that some of these, like these type of talks and articles and stuff, help share the information that people want in a way that's easier for us to deliver too, right? Like having a talk where you and Matthias can dive into questions about these indices, or it's way easier and more entertaining too for me than I think reading a README file that you didn't want to write.
Yeah.
He just made me do all the writing for the tech talk, which is super helpful for me. And how does, if you do have like a split scenario where like I have data that's a few months old and I upgraded to a newer version, how does that work? Is it just the old data stays around in the old format and it gets queried when it gets hit in the query range, and then all new data from that point forward just gets written in the new format, even if you backfill? So correct. I could have overlapping data from, like, let's just say January, that I backfill, it will show up in the new format, even though there's data in the old format for that time period.
I would just make a slight correction. So we actually don't change formats. So the data format is the same. That's very important. So what actually changes the location of the data. So basically where files live, the directory changes. That's it.
It's a layout, not a format, right? Like the index format is the same. It's just put in a different folder.
So in a way, it was just a huge refactoring. So we did not change any API surface. We did not change any data format. It's just we rearranged the internals of the code and the layout on the file system. That's pretty much it.
Hey, I'm sure users appreciate that, right? Is putting that hard work is done on our end and behind the scenes, so they can just take advantage of the gains of it, right? Like, yeah. I'm sure people appreciate you guys making it so it is just an upgrade and it works.
Yeah, I mean that's in a way that's our not policy, but the way that something that we promised to the users. So it's just upgrade, right? So that's why we encourage to use or always use the latest version. And yeah, in order to satisfy this promise, so you have to make things at least forward compatible, right? And so
well, yeah, if you want people to stay with a current or even close to current version of your software, you have to make sure that it's A, easy to upgrade, and B, it's painless for them and it has a value, right? So it seems like maybe we don't release as fast as others, but we release and it does what it says on the tin. The users get the performance without the pain. So
yeah, you can upgrade from, I think it's like 1.84 or something in that ballpark.
direct.
Is like, yeah, is the last time there was a incompatible change. And even then you just upgrade to 184, let it hang out for like 24 hours, and then you can upgrade to current. Like I haven't had to do any special rituals or anything in between upgrades since I've started using VictoriaMetrics.
I remember I was working with somebody on a project who had to do an update to 10,000 servers. And let me say that the update process for the database they were using was not that straightforward and not simple. And
was there animal sacrifice involved?
I think there was all sorts of things must have been sacrificed. I know a lot of sanity and health, and but it got done. And then
every time they started the upgrades, they had to snap a stick of RAM in half and burn it like incense, right?
And as soon as it's done, somebody decides to sell them another database. That's a 4-year transition project. But
that's rough. So upgrading is fairly simple. You can query your historical data, and after 2 retention periods, everything should be in the new format, right?
Mm-hmm. Good.
And if I was very anxious, is there a way that I could force this to happen, even if I had to get creative with VMCTL to do it?
Right. So you might try to migrate data from the old installation to a new one using this VMCTL. But again, that's we are talking about moving gigabytes or terabytes of data. And some could.
Because so if you were anxious to do it, what you would do is, I'm just going to use VM single just because it's easier and I'm lazy. We would just take VM single old and then VM single new and VMCTL. And VMCTL is able to backfill anytime in the retention period, which is something fairly unique to VictoriaMetrics, where backfill or out of order writes, there's not a significant performance penalty and it's possible. So if you do want to take advantage of the new index, you could either take a storage node and use a VM select and a VM insert just attached to those nodes, and then use VMCTL to pipe it through. If it's VM single, it's just VMCTL, old node, new node, and you can see what the differences are in terms of performance and storage usage, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like you're going to write any of this because you've had enough of rewriting the index format.
Writing like migration instructions, or because, well, it doesn't seem to require any code. So
Yeah, it would just require running vmctl using the existing instructions.
Well, you know, Art,
So I think it's something that could fit in like a blog post or a how-to article. It
Well, yeah, and I
wouldn't
think
require like a fancy section in the docs.
would you say too, Matthias, that you and your particular role and the rest of your team too are in a unique place where you would be potentially helping people through this, so you guys could be tracking some of your best practices and experiences in that to help create
Yep.
sort of a
There's-
user's doc versus a developer's doc? Because I think that's two areas where we get a little confused with documentation too. Sometimes we write really great developer docs from the minds, the inside of the minds who created it, but then there's also the side of the docs that are like, okay, how do I implement it? So I think having both of those, your team might be able to come up with something pretty useful.
Are you just trying to sign me up for more work to do, Mark?
I am volunteering you to do it.
It's not too bad. And it's a fun philosophical thing too, because it feels like the Ship of Theseus experiment where you have a boat. And if you replace every part of the boat one at a time, is it a new boat? Is it the same boat?
Like my grandfather's axe. I heard you say the name of that, the ship of, I heard it wrong.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Sorry, Arnab, I was saying I thought he said the ship of feces. So, sorry.
feces.
Yeah, poop. I thought I don't know why he was talking about that. I was wrong.
So Artem, I'm not saying you're going to have to write any of this. It sounds like you've had enough of IndexedDB for a while, but I think there's some features that are either made significantly easier or possible now. So since there's just one, each month is its own logical entity, could we do partial backups now?
Partial backups. Well, the VM backup and VM backup manager that we have, they don't distinguish between old and new version. So they won't enable you to do these partial backups, well, at least explicitly, but some may opt for some optional, like custom workflows, such as writing the script that copies a partition to some cold storage. And that partition will be self-sufficient, meaning that you can start a new VictoriaMetrics deployment of this partition, right? So in a way, so yeah, it's partial backups are possible. Just, for example, the way I described, but right now we didn't think about anything that VictoriaMetrics could provide. I mean, we could, we just did not consider it yet. But yeah, in a way, it's possible.
But yeah, that's the tough thing, right? There's a million things that could be built to make it better, and you have to pick which ones you do in what order, right?
And the story I had in my head for how this was developed was like, you just got shut in an office in Poland and popped out a year later with a new index. Is that kind of how it worked?
Not really. I was just working, and it's not like I was working. I just sat and worked on partition index. I was doing on call, and often was switching to other tasks and bugs. So no, in a way that's why partition index took so long, just because, well, I had to interrupt work like often, but that's okay. I mean, yeah. It's good to take a break at times.
Well, I think too is doing those, intermixing those things too, keeps probably the mind fresh, and you being able to spark more ideas about what you're doing and find more oopsies or good gains.
Yeah, I've noticed just forcing myself to change to something else if I've looked at the same thing over and over again. I like step away for a few minutes, come back, and I'm like, oh, that's how to do this thing I was stuck on for 3 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I see object storage on here, Matthias.
Oh God.
When you were making your comparison, your analogy about moving into the new house and moving stuff around, and then I have a second index, and I was like, oh, in my garage is the object storage, because that's where all the crap goes that I don't want to get rid of. And everybody wants more object storage.
There's literally a project called Garage that is object storage. Did you know that?
And then there's going to be people that have companies that are garage organizers for object storage, right?
Yeah. Especially with recent news with Min.io, Garage has actually gotten a lot of attention recently.
Yeah. And Artem, the reason we bring up object storage here and so much about it is that every single time we do a talk, or anyone in VictoriaMetrics does it, there's inevitably a question pops in going, when is object storage? Like it's a guaranteed thing. So we're trying to get ahead of the curve.
Yeah. I think Alexander and I have both written short novels inside of the GitHub issue about why it's not as perfect as what people want. But my understanding is it's going to land in logs first, because the use case for object storage and logs is very straightforward, where the government says, or whoever allows you to do business says, you have to store these text-based logs for 7 years. Otherwise you can't stay in business, no matter how often you touch them. And so having that in object storage makes sense, where they never get read or touched again. But
they shouldn't get read or touched. They're there because they have a chance to at some point if they're called into question or has to be looked at. So they could be read.
Yeah. So it's okay because they might get touched in the 7 years that they're kept for. So if it's slow, you would rather not have to pay to keep them on hot storage. Whereas metrics, there are features like downsampling that are nearly impossible to do in object storage. So to use Thanos as an example, if you look at their documentation for object storage, they tell you don't do this to save money, because of how object storage is built and structured. It will end up eating most of the space savings you would get from downsampling gets eaten by the API cost inside of object storage.
Yeah, makes sense. For logs, we used to do a lot of it at another place, was helping with the pruning, because obviously as we move there into selling as a service, as their cloud, people were worried about retention, because retention is what they paid for in the end. So we had the ability to keep it on your indexes that are going to be read and read a lot, fast storage up front. We had cooler storage, and then you could punt it off to spinning disks for those indices that you likely are never going to read, or they're just for proprietary, but they also had PII information was taken care of. Do we look at any of that when we're pushing stuff off to different locations?
PII, no. Tiering becomes consistent. Artem and I talked about this during prep. Tiering would have been possible before, but much trickier, and I think only possible with samples. Whereas now this structure is basically the same in metrics, logs, and traces. The main difference being that the indexes for logs and traces are daily rather than monthly. Like there's only daily indices inside of traces and logs. So once the object storage implementation is stable there, we can start looking at it for metrics, and it should be fairly similar.
Yeah, I can imagine us having to do some type of roll up on logs too, like having it just by day is going to be problematic when logging starts going and we expand what the ingest is coming in from. Because logging, I'll tell you, grows infinitely, where metrics grow. They grow on an unpredictable scale.
And that's the other thing too, is you can sample metrics fairly easily, but sampling logs and keeping the government happy is fairly challenging.
Yeah.
Because logs want to see every event that's happened, and there's not a way to really sample that infidelity. Like you might be able to store a count of a certain type of event that happened, but if you want to know exactly when something happened and all the fidelity of it, there's not like an equivalent to downsampling of that I'm aware of anyway. So object storage is easier now, but it's not going to come until after it's available in logs and traces, and we're happy with the implementation for that.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea to wait until some stable implementation is at least available in some other products. And but yeah, with partition index, it certainly becomes at least more granular. So let's say you want to move the last three partitions to object storage. So yeah, it's possible. So without touching the legacy index. So previously you would need to copy the entire legacy index just to make it work. So right now it's easier, right?
And once all data is in the new layout, it's also cheaper to back up as well. So along with having the ability to pull out just a month of data, it will eventually be cheaper because there's only one generation of the index total, correct?
Well, it's not that previously the entire legacy index was copied to when you were making a backup. I mean, you actually have the entire index in your backup, but it's not that you are copying the entire index every time you make a backup. So you only copy the new parts, and actually backup manager, VM backup or backup manager, anyways. So it copies only new parts and deletes the parts that don't exist locally anymore. So so it is kind of efficient already. So, and with partition index, nothing changes here. So it will behave the same way. Actually.
Okay. Partial restore. Another fun thing that would have actually saved me about a month ago was because each month is a separate entity, if you do end up having corruption, it's a limited blast radius. So if you do have like a file system issue or something like the hard drive backing your storage dies, what can happen now is that if it was only part of the hard drive that was corrupt and not the whole thing, the worst thing that can happen is you lose a month of data. So sometimes you can surgically remove like a bad part or a bad section, but if that doesn't work, you lose that entire storage node and you have to restore from backup. But if you have like a corrupt part in the new format, the worst thing that could happen is a month of data. So it also along with being a bit more efficient on disk, it also gives you the ability to limit blast radius if you do have issues with storage.
Could it be not just if there is corruption or an issue, Matthias, but I'm thinking back to, again, sorry, I keep having PTSD and going back to my Elastic days. But could it also be where there's an event that I want to pull out because it's anomalous and it's looking wrong? Let's say it was launched a new site and staging was in, or I want to get rid of a Black Friday, all the metrics and logs from the day before and the day after because it is screwing up. It's anomalous. I could just go into that then and take those 2 days out of the new index structure and pull
it
them
would
out,
be
fine.
Month is the smallest unit for metrics. So let's just say you wanted to take a snapshot of you're an e-commerce business and you want to take a snapshot of November, December, because those are your busiest months of the year. You can just copy those folders off of the storage node, put them somewhere else, say, hey, this is the new storage volume, and then spin them back up.
Just replay them. Okay, cool.
It wouldn't even be a replay. It's like you copy the files, you put them in the new storage folder.
Oh, that's right, because they're already indexed. That's already there. So it is literally just, yeah. I like that.
Because I've talked with somebody that wanted to do tape backup, and the new per month indexing makes that way easier.
Yeah.
Because it's like out of order writes are just pretty much out of the question on tape. There's not enough gray in my beard to quite understand that, but my understanding is that you can pretty much only write sequentially. And so if you're just able to say, take a month, shove it on the end of the tape archive, that's much better than the previous situation.
I think the tapes are make-believe. They're placebo. No one's ever replayed one. They go into Iron Mountain, which they really just put them back out.
It's Schrodinger's backup.
Yep.
Have you heard that joke before?
I've heard of Schrodinger and all the jokes of it, but not about his backup.
Yeah. So if you have backups that you haven't tested yet, they're in a superposition where they both work and don't work.
I call them my quantum backups.
Yeah. They exist in both states of being a functioning backup and a non-functioning backup. And then when you try to restore it, you collapse it into the state where
Artem,
the backup works. Or it
I don't know if you were prepared for this level of craziness on this tech talk. Sorry, Artem.
It's okay. I should join you guys more often.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, it's fun. One of the things, Matthias, that I had been talking about, honestly, is that there's so many people that do interesting things here at VictoriaMetrics. If it's, interesting in something for VictoriaMetrics or just in our space or that it's fun to have different people on and just talk for an hour. And yeah, it's no pressure. We just want to pick your brain a little bit. So we're so glad that, you're open to this.
Yeah. This year, the hardest part is picking what is the coolest thing that happened this month that I want to talk about.
Yeah. Well, this one was easy, wasn't it?
Yeah. Next month it's challenging because, well, Artem didn't make another index format change. And also there's single sign-on in VMauth now. So you can use OIDC to authenticate directly to the database and do some security controls there. But we had already promised Fred some new features with VM Anomaly UI, where you even need to know less about data science to get value out of it, which is really saying something because I can use VM Anomaly UI now.
But you should be able to. That's the goal, right? Is that, hey, software is about taking a difficult concept that an engineer's brain can figure out and making it possible for somebody else to execute on that. So, I mean, if you need to have a data science degree to run VM Anomaly is not done yet, right? We got to make the software in the end has got to be easy enough that nobody writes a README file.
Yeah. Right now it's down to, for me anyway, it's one semester of statistics and a ML class I took in college.
Mine is this. I don't do numbers. Awesome. Well, that's cool. Is there anything else, Artem, that you want to add about either the work on here or anything else, or what you might be looking forward to working on next here? Or are you allowed to hint towards that?
Next, actually, something that partition index enables. So there was a long-standing requirement for future metrics. And looks like that with partition index, it is possible right now. So before it wasn't, you could actually accidentally lose your future samples after the legacy index DB rotation. But right now it's kind of possible. I will at least do some tests to see if it is indeed feasible.
Is that my fault you're stuck doing that? Because I remember asking you about it after somebody commented on the GitHub issue.
I mean, I did not reply right away just because I wanted to bring this question on the sync, and we discussed it with the team, and decided to implement it since this request was kind of popular, so to speak. So this thing, and another thing is actually that's not related to partition index, but one of the next things would be making cloud native protocols available in VM single. That basically enables you to proxy requests to it. So
when you say cloud native, you mean cluster, correct?
I mean, it supports the RPC communication. Like you can actually, point via VM insert to it just to load data.
That is extremely exciting because I know that's another popular issue, and it's caused some headaches for people who've grown out of single.
Right. There was an attempt and it failed. I don't know why. I still need to look through all the history, like this ticket, both this ticket and the PR. Let's see.
Hey, Artem, something just came in my mind that I wanted to ask if it's all right. Is there anything that you can think of with the new indexing format that somebody could do something wrong and cause problems? Like, is there any way that, can you envision a way that a user is going to upgrade, try to do something and
Yeah.
make a boo-boo? Like, are there any watch outs?
There is one thing. It's this partition index is tempting to think that a partition is a self-sufficient database, but it's not. I mean, by that I mean that you can copy this partition somewhere else and start VM storage on top of it, and it will work, right? But there is a if you decide, let's say, to copy this partition to from one deployment to another, that won't work. I
So
mean, it may work, and but the problem is that the metric IDs that this partition stores. So these metric IDs, they are not unique. So they are unique only within a given deployment. And if you copy partitions like this, copy them around like this, so you might actually end up with metric ID mess. So and
if
just get
Yeah.
some.
So what would happen then if I was to, let's just say I have server A that's been running and it's fine. I have server B and I've copied the partition or part of the partition from server B, my new one, and I put it onto server A. When server A looks at it and there's conflicting metric IDs, is there any logic, or what happens? Like, what does it happen? Does it decide one of them is right, or does it just fall over?
VM storage does not decide. It will just serve those metric IDs, and you will see it on your graphs, basically.
Okay.
So most likely it just will be some white noise, or I don't know.
So I can imagine that, honestly, that little tidbit will be carved out somehow and save somebody who's done something that's a little bit weird, and they'll find that little piece that we just talked about and go, "That's what I did," and be able to back out of it.
I think we should clarify that a little bit. So this is if you take, let's just say you have a node with data in the new layout that's a year old, and you have a new node that only has this month's data. If you took a month of data from the old node and put it in the new node, is the only time you would run across this, correct? It's like just mixing months from different storage nodes is where this pops up. If you take a completely independent month and just put it as its own separate database, that's fine. But if you Frankenstein two nodes is where this could happen.
Yeah, for example, you run some high availability with two zones, and in one zone you lost your partition for some reason, and you decided to copy it from another zone. So it result in a problem. So it's best not to do that.
But yet, you know darn well, at least you're saved from when somebody does it and then calls for support on it, right? Like, at least you're a couple of steps away from that.
I mean, if you have a very high churn rate and you know that you won't have metrics in this months that compared to metrics from previous months, that will probably work because, well,
there's no intersection of names, right? That's where it would hit.
But again, I am not sure. So if someone tries and then reports.
Oh, trust me, I'll deploy it and I'll find everything to break without meaning to. I'll never get it to work, but I'll get it to break. So.
His environment's not stable enough to turn off per day indexing.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, hey guys, we're coming right up to the hour. Artem, I want to thank you again. Really, it was a great pleasure having a chance. First time I've had a chance to speak with you. I thought you were really great at sharing this information. It was fun to have some laughs, and I hope you can be on more of these tech talks coming up. And Matthias, thanks as well for being my trusty co-host for the last year. So this is my last VictoriaMetrics Tech Talk show. So I'm moving on to work on a boat or something. So I want to just say, everybody that's had a chance to listen to me for the last year and a bit, thanks, and thanks to Matthias and all the guests. And I can't wait to keep watching the show and asking my silly questions in the chat instead of on camera.
It's been a pleasure working with you. See ya.
Right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
And